Good morning, dear friends. Holy Yidden. We're studying the entire Talmud, one page, one line at a time. Presently, Peschim, Vav Amud Aleph. I should say what today is. It's the 5th of Nisan, Hey Nisan, March 27th. Mitzvah Hashem, hopefully, we're hoping tomorrow's headlines will be that in Israel all is calm and the entire country is agreeing on everything because Mashiach came, and even actually reminds me of a story that someone once came to the Rebbe and said, I have a dream that we'll get all the Rabbanim in the same room and we won't let them leave until they iron out and figure out all the problems, all the questions, and about 1 day Pesach, 2 days Pesach, Duchening and Chutz La'aretz, so they're all year round. All the things that are different between the Sephardim and the Ashkenazim and the Litvaks and the Hasidim, we're going to figure everything out. And then we're going to bring Mashiach, he says. So the Rebbe says, I love the idea, I love the sentiment, but what you're actually describing is Mashiach, not something that we can pull off prior to Mashiach. But we can still pray and hope that there will be achdus and mutual respect and of course, protection and well-being for all those who live in Israel. And I want to particularly dedicate today's learning, with your permission, to honor the Siyum HaShiva. It's the conclusion of Shiva for Mendel Seidner of our community, Mendel Wolf ben Baruch Lazer. And so I want to dedicate today's learning for his neshama and in prayerful wishes that his family should somehow find the nechama and bracha, and that we should only have good news and healthy news and happy news for all of Klal Yisrael, and certainly for our community. Which leads us to today's Gemara. So I want to give you a fast refresher. We've been reviewing the responsibility to do biur chametz and bedikas chametz, searching for the chametz and eliminating the chametz. And along the way, we realized that it's straightforward. You went to the store, you bought a 6-pack of beer, that's chametz. You're going to have to do biur chametz. You're going to have to get rid of that beer. Okay. No puns intended whatsoever. Now, what if your buddy comes over to watch the game and he leaves his beer? What if your neighbor says, I'm leaving town with my wife for the weekend. The kids are coming over. They bring a bunch of friends. I've got some beautiful, wonderful single malt. Been saving it for a special occasion. I don't trust my kids. Would you mind holding on to this? You better not lose it, because if you do, you will be replacing that. Is that considered your chametz or their chametz? And on and on and on it went. And so we went through a whole bunch of different scenarios and situations when one would be chayiv to purge chametz and one would not be obligated to purge the chametz. And it was based on a careful analysis and reading of 2 psukim that both describe the prohibition of chametz. We then went on to ask the question, or to clarify, that the very brisa talks about sometimes you may not have a Gentile's chametz in your possession. And in the very same brisa, it indicates that you could have a Gentile's chametz in your possession, And the Gemara gives the explanation, which sounds quite elementary and simple, which is as follows. If you are chayiv b'acharayis, if it's going to be your problem, if you're going to have to compensate them, so then you will have to then it's considered your chametz and you have to get rid of it. We brought a story of soldiers. The citizens of Mechuzah had to garrison soldiers, or had to have soldiers in their homes. What do we call that? Not garrison. There was another where billeting. There was a responsibility for billeting to provide not only sleeping arrangements but provisions. And so Rava told the folks, if you have chametz in your town, that's considered your chametz. It's your problem. You need to get rid of it, because you are ultimately going to be liable to how do you call it? To return it. That was
Rabbi.
Yes, Rabbi.
You skipped over the part that I have difficulty understanding, which was you shouldn't see chametz.
I didn't skip over it, but it's a good point. I mean, I didn't say it, but yeah, you shouldn't have chametz that you see. But we gave a number of qualifications that it has to be yours. Allowed to see a Gentile's chametz if it's not yours at all. Like Rebbe, you pointed out, there might be a scenario where there might be a scenario where you sell your refrigerator to a Gentile and it's his beer and it's his problem. Well, then maybe you're off the hook. And that was the subject of a premature discussion about selling chametz, which we will revisit Be'ezer Hashem. The Gemara is going to go on what appears to be a solid tangent. And for a few lines, we're going to be off of the subject of chametz, but on the question of partnership.
I have a question about this ruling of Rava where the chametz was placed in the homes of Jews by the Romans.
Okay. Not Romans, but yeah, Persians.
Authorities. It looked like his ruling would need either some interpretation or some explanation, or because the consequences of destroying the government chametz could be quite serious for the Jewish community in the future.
Right. So that's a good.
Gemara doesn't address this issue.
So that's actually a good question. I actually was thinking about it. Because think about it. Imagine the United States government shipped you special packs, even the United States government, which is a whole lot nicer and kinder than many other governments. Although, imagine they sent you a bunch of packs of special sealed grain sacks with the United States military seal or whatever. And if you were just to throw that out there, you could imagine there would be consequences. It's government property and it's a federal crime, et cetera, et cetera. So surely Rava is instructing. Hold on. So surely Rava is instructing folks here to do something that sounds like a very, very big crime. However, my impression based on the reading and based on the psak is that it's a whole lot more casual than what we're envisioning. And the Jew has a responsibility to provide. So it's possible that this flour originated from his own property, and he's going to have to provide for them. But it does not seem that it's considered a severe crime against the government, which makes me think, which indicates, as we're saying, Mark makes a very good point, which is that if it was in a special government sack, maybe there would be a different situation. It doesn't talk about culpability of death or whatever. It seems like it's purely a monetary expense and responsibility to make whole, as opposed to something further. But it deserves more exploration, and I have a feeling that scholars today, historians today, may have actually looked into and actually probed what we know about this billeting responsibility in the town of Mechuzah, and it'd be curious to know what the actual historic circumstances were.
Rabbi.
Yes, Rabbi.
One more small diversion. In today's world, a problem could
hold on. Are you accusing the professor of a diversion? I don't think his question was.
I'm accusing myself of taking you on.
Oh, okay.
Off the
go ahead.
Track. But the way the world works today, you could receive during Passover chametz, which either you ordered or you didn't order, or somebody sent you. It's a whole other area. What do? You get an Amazon box that was delayed, or I don't know.
Light a bonfire.
Well, I know there was one year on Pesach where they were sending a sample of Cheerios with the newspaper, and they announced to shul, when it comes, just take your paper out of the bag and leave it at the bottom of your driveway. Don't take.
Oh, they were using Cheerios as filler, or those peanuts are chametz?
No, a sample.
Peanuts would just be kidneys, but yeah, I think Cheerios or pretzels. There was some sample that was coming in. It came in not in the mail, but in with the newspaper. Newspaper's in a plastic bag and it had a little packet. They said if you want to take your paper out, just leave the bag sitting there at the bottom of the driveway. Because you're not makabel it, it's not yours. It's still in. I think it still would have been in Rishus Rabim even. Yeah, at the bottom.
Rabbi, what happens if you have a job and it's a non-Jewish company and you're working for a food distributor and you have to work on Chol Moed? What do you do?
I would have a long, in-depth conversation with my competent local Orthodox posek to find out exactly what one could and couldn't do. There are probably many questions. For example, who owns the government, the company issued vehicle, and could you not? How? But I'm fairly certain there are certain things that even if you lose your job, you'd probably not be allowed to entertain due to the severity of chametz, and that's a great question. I hope no one has to be put to that test.
A more realistic issue is of in a hospital, a non-Jewish hospital,
yes,
a nurse or an aide who goes around serving food to the patients, giving.
That's a good question. I mean, it doesn't quite become yours if you're serving it, but that's a good question, right? Whose food are you serving? You're delivering the hospital's food to the patient. But Dr. Hammer, I'll revise your question. Then you will have a problem. What if you're a Jewish nurse or whatever food deliverer person, and you know and your patient is Jewish? Yeah. Your patient is Jewish, so it's not a prohibition of your chametz. There's more. I'll take. Thank you. Is it considered lifnei iver lo sitein michshal? And go a step further. Today, there's a controversy, not the big controversy, which I'm not going to touch with a 10-foot pole, but there's a question about chametz in Israeli hospitals.
Right.
they
And so
just changed the law this year.
Yeah.
So there's the core question, which I am not qualified to weigh in on, but there's another question, which is the question of lifnei iver. If you are a nurse or the server or a delivery person, so it's not your chametz, but are you allowed to be a facilitator of a Jew eating chametz?
The law. There's no chametz in the hospital.
Also, doctor.
Patient
agreeing.
Visitor.
Oh, okay. So doctors.
Are they going to be checking?
Dr. Stamler made a critical correction. The hospitals are serving kosher for Pesach food. The whole question was if we're going to prohibit a visitor from bringing chametz to themselves, and that's of course a whole lot more on the question of free choice. But now let me reframe the question. Then we'll jump into the new Gemara. What if you are caring for a patient in the hospital and their nephew brought them? Why did I say nephew? I don't know. Their mishpacha brought them a delicious falafel or a bagel and cream cheese, and it's sitting on the counter, and the patient says, "Excuse me, would you mind passing me my falafel?" Are you allowed to? So that's not really a question of Pesach. That's a question of lifnei iver lo sitein michshal, but a good question to ponder.
Rabbi, if you're in that situation, put gloves on.
Why? Hold on. The gloves will avoid you having chametz residue on your hands, but the gloves will not avoid the fact that you facilitated another Jewish person from eating chametz, right? Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehakol nihya b'dvarim.
Amen.
Hold on, I'm just looking up one more thing about
on a flight. If you're on a plane sitting in the
I'm
middle,
just looking up.
Non-Jews.
I want to look up one thing related to the professor's question, and then we're going to study some new Gemara. Bear with me. Why am I not finding it? Bear with me. That's strange.
Let me go back inside.
Hang on. Okay, good. I'm curious about the history and the specific. I mean, it's the Gemara's comment too. The Ramban later on in the Gemara, here, let me read you an excerpt, explains that the residents of Mechuzah, again, going back to the story of the soldiers, either were, the government said, house the soldiers, and you're going to be liable for their provisions, either protect them, and if they disappear, you're going to have to replace them, or maybe the Jewish people themselves made an agreement with the local military that they're going to be responsible. But here's the language of the Ramban, and we already should know this. If a random Gentile says, "Hey, I'm going to leave you my bottle, my blue label, so my kids don't drink it," says the Ramban, you're not automatically mikabel achrayot, which means if it disappears, you didn't commit to replace it, and therefore you might not need to eliminate it. And this gets into a Gemara that we're going to learn a long time from now. The question of what the default setting of your Shmira, right? There's a lot of discussion in Gemara about the Shomrim. If you receive something to watch for your friend, right? The question is, what is the degree of, what is your relationship to that item? Do you have to repay if it's stolen or lost, if it's negligent, etc.? So the question really is what the default setting of if a Gentile gives you something and it's not within the Torah framework, so what kind of responsibility do you have? And it seems like the default setting is not to have a high degree of responsibility. However, the Rambam disagrees. Oh, okay, actually, hold on. Yeah, give me one more second. I want to make sure I'm giving this. The Ramban writes that if the Gentile will, even if you didn't accept responsibility, if the neighbor says, I'm going to smash your windows if you don't reimburse me, even if you didn't formally accept the Christ, you would have to get rid of it. And the Ravid says, okay, we'll hold off on that. Anyways, so I don't know if I fully answered the professor's question, but I wanted to at least do my best. Doctor, you want to say?
What? Is feed them grain.
Can't hear it.
Well, the rabbi heard.
The doctor asked the question. I'm not going to answer now because I don't have the answer at my fingertips. The Gemara is going to discuss.
I have a question.
Hold on. And this is the Rabbi Nachem's question was the last question for now. We'll have another opportunity to. His question was animal feed. Animal feed. Can you feed your animals chametz?
Well, chicken, specifically grain.
Generally speaking, Rabbi Nachem says the food you feed your chicken is grain. Can you feed them chametz? I mean, I believe the answer is that you're not allowed to own chametz, so you would not be allowed to feed your animals chametz. You feed them corn, which is kidneys, but not chametz. I don't know if they eat corn either. It's a good question. No, I'd be curious to know. You have a farmer that follows halakha. What do they do? How do they navigate? And well, anyways, okay. Let's do a little new Gemara. It's challenging in the fact that it's a different topic than chametz. Let's get through it, and then we'll be back to the question of chametz on Pesach, and it's coming right up. Rava question was asked Rava along the subject of complex ownership dynamics. Behemas arnuna chayeves b'chayra ein chayeves b'chayra. So let's read Rashi. What is arnuna? Arnuna is the name for an animal that belongs to a tax liability to the king. Rashi. Hamelech noitel isor min habehema min hatfuah. The way it was many times, many places, is that there's a certain amount of your stuff that is taxed to the king. That's very common. Even in the United States of America, there is a tax burden. The question that is going to be interesting is, what is the relationship of that tax, that item, and the king? So let's not think about all taxes. Let's just consider what this Arnuna is all about. So it's an animal that you're going to have to give, I guess, that animal itself. Or it was part of a bunch of animals that one of them is going to have to go to the king. So is that animal take on a responsibility of Bechor? Because as we know, a firstborn animal is Kodesh and it's donated to the Kohen. But this animal, maybe even before it was born, a certain percentage of it belongs to the Gentile. So is it subject, as we're going to see in Rashi in a moment, to the laws of Bechor? Doctor?
I have an answer. Apparently, people buy in Israel a mixture of corn and millet, feed that. However, the guy that asked the question says he finds a lot of.
Is millet chametz?
Regular grain mixed in with it.
But millet is chametz or not?
I don't think so.
Okay.
But he finds grain, and he's worried that he'll get. The answer is sell it. Sell your mixture before Pesach.
But then you feed your animal. Sell the chametz within it. Okay. So I'm sorry to go back to chametz, but Dr. Stamler is an expert Googler, and he did the research, and he discovered that animal feed the advice is to buy a special animal feed that's kosher for Pesach. It's kidneys, but not chametz. But what happens if sometimes you have an occasional kernel or grain of corn mixed in? And I'm sorry, not corn, chametz. And so the website that presents the question and answer says he should sell the chametz that's mixed in. If it's a small amount, he should sell that to the Gentiles so that he does not have the ownership of the chametz, and he's not intending or really having hana from it because he is has sold it. All right, let's go back here and let's try to probe exactly what's going on. So you have an animal that the new animals that are born that year, there's a responsibility, a liability to the government. Rashi, chayeves bechora. Is it liable to be donated? Do you have to give a bechor of that? Oh, ein chayeves. I'm sorry, I take that back. No. Yeah. You have a number of bechors which have the status of bechor. What's the question? The kaimalon kol sheyad nachri be'emtz. So long as there is a Gentile partnership, petura min ha-bechora, there is no bechor responsibility. There's no obligation to donate it to the kohen. Shnemar li kol bechor b'Yisrael avalo ba'achirim. The liability, the responsibility to contribute to Hashem, the firstborn to Hashem, is only when it's Jewish possession. But not if there is other owners that are not Jewish people. The Eider Zeh, this flock, 1/10 belongs to the king. So now the question is, I imagine the question is, how do you envision a flock where 10 animals, let's call it 10 newborns, and one of them belongs to the king? Do we say that the king really owns 1/10 of every animal, but we settle for one animal and that way we resolve the responsibility? Or is it from the chatchila just the animal that the king is going to end up getting? So let's read Rashi. Rabba says, anytime that we could pay the king with money instead of livestock, so really the king doesn't own your animal. The king is owed value. So that's on you. So then, of course, you're chayiv, says Rava, to give that all those bechors to the kohen. Rashi, the matzi misalak le'nachri lo'itevoyle kivan dakati lo'izach nachri ben, being that the Gentile is not taken possession. V'dinoi enei kavua behen yois or mimois, and the king is not more entitled to the animal, to the livestock than cash. So you should choose to give it to the kohen. But where is our question? You have no option of telling the government, I'm going to give you cash, let me wire you the money. No, they insist. They need to have the actual animal. What's the halacha? Amar lahu petura. Rava says, in that case, you are potter. Why are you potter? Because the king essentially, or the government essentially, is a partner in all these animals. Vatanya chayeves. The Gemara says, hang on, there's a brisa that says that you are chayiv. Hasam dematzi misalakles. The Gemara answers, that's talking about where you're able to give them cash. But if there's no cash, the Gentile if the government gets the animal, so then it is considered a partnership of a Jew and a Gentile, and therefore you're off the hook. Are you off the hook just of that?
Rabbi.
Let me mute myself.
If the animal dies, does the government give him back his money?
I don't know. Probably not. Governments don't usually give back anything they take. True or false? All right. Ikadamri, another way this discussion was preserved and formulated, maybe with a different halachic implication. Rava taught the hemas harnuna petura min ha-bechora, an animal that is part of a flock that is responsible for the king to have 1/10 of it. You are exempt from giving it to the kohen. So ironically, here it might be good business to have to pay because I think every bechor goes to the king. I mean, every bechor goes to the kohen, but 1/10 would exempt the entire flock. But of course, Anyways, okay. Even though you're able to pay them off, still you are potter. But dough, maybe the government also would get 1/10 of your dough. You still have to give challah. Even though you're not able to get rid of the responsibility with cash. My timer, what's the difference between animals and dough? Behema islay kala. As Rabbi Steinsaltz explains it, everyone knows the animal was taken by the authorities. You won't suspect him of trying to wiggle out of his obligation. Iso less like color. When it comes to dough, it's not a big deal. There isn't a dramatic moment when the king's men come and bring a big truck and cart off your animal. It's just they come and take a slice of the dough. It's not a big event. And so based on this reading, based on Rabbi Steinsaltz, it sounds almost like a Maris Ayin question, which I know gets some of our attention. In contrast, dough does not generate prosody. Since not everyone knows that dough is partially owned by a Gentile, those who see the Jew failing, so that's very interesting. I'm not sure everyone's going to agree with this this take, but that's Rabbi Steinsaltz's explanation. He didn't make it up. Obviously, this is based on other commentaries. Let's see if anybody will comment here, because that's a very interesting what do you think? Any thoughts here, folks? What do we make of this?
Well, basically, if they consider it a partnership, he's off the hook. He's butter. That's basically what it boils
So it sounds
down to.
like,
And I guess we're heading into, if you're a partnership with chametz, what's your obligation with a guy?
it sounds like,
I'm sure that's what they're leading into.
it sounds like we're talking about a Marsayin kind of question. That's really what it sounds like. But there's another pshat here I'm seeing, which actually is what I was thinking, which is animal, the government knows it's born. There's no tax evasion with an animal. It's big, it's noisy. And so the government's going to take it. But dough is such a small and non-public event that is very, very likely and possible that that the government will never find out about it. Or alternatively, you think the government's going to want to send agents to schlep and pick up a little dough, which is maybe worth less than the hourly rate that it's going to cost to pay those agents to come. So although you are technically obligated, it could be that this is something that the IRS will not follow up on. I don't know if the word is lahavdil, but I think once upon a time, the government wasn't really interested in following up on tips that waitstaff got. It was self-reporting, and it seems like maybe many people did not pay taxes on tips. And today, hearing that the government is finding ways to collect on those tips. So maybe in those days, no one knows about the challah. Anyways, Adkan, this concludes our little detour on the subject of Arnuna, an item that belongs to an item that's part of a taxable lot. And by extension, it sounds like we are exempting the entire flock, right? Let's see if there's any halachic. You see, there's a lot of conversation here. I doubt. Well, let's see this. A flock from which the king's men take tenths. Being that commingled in the flock, there is that part that's going to be donated to the kohen. One is exempt from the chayr, so this is canonized, formalized in halacha. The Ramah says, and here he says that even if you can pay them off, we follow the second version in the Gemara that says you would still be off the hook. Very interesting. So here we find, and I think this is pretty common, that the Gemara is going to paskin like the second version presented here. Let's take a look at real fast at what the Rambam has to say. No, that's not the one. Here. Two partners, two Jewish partners, they have to give the Bechor to the Kohen. Unless it's a Shutos Hanach Rishon, Shutos B'Par Uvar. Even if it was the smallest fraction, he'd be potter. That's very interesting. You would think that people would abuse this. Maybe they did. Anyway, okay, let's go back to chametz. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
You get a 5% partner,
Mark.
and you're off the hook.
Mhm.
Doing the kind of sneaky.
Rabbi,
Yes.
if we do this, follow this reasoning, if you're in a 20% tax bracket, are you supposed to consider the government owning 20% of everything you have?
Not when it's cash, because you can pay your taxes. You don't need to give the government.
I'd love to send them a sheep.
No. Here's I think what we're saying here. When you are in modern times, your tax obligation is not a specific gold coin, because you're not usually paid in gold coin. You're paid in imaginary money that pops up in your bank account and only becomes real when you want to cash it out or transfer it to somebody else, right? I think that's why the banks today are all of a sudden short of money, because they don't have dollar bills in the bank or gold or anything or value in on hand. And so it's just an imaginary commitment. Okay, maybe I'm showing ignorance in how finance and currency works. I'm afraid I'm right. Anyways,
You're asking questions that are not supposed to be asked.
no, that's what's going on right now. The reason why all these banks are collapsing is if too many people want to withdraw
behind that
cash.
piece of paper?
Right. Anyways, the point is that when you pay taxes, you're not giving that very item. But in a hypothetical world where instead of being paid taxes, instead of your salary being money, you were being paid items, and the government said you got to give us one out of those items. So yeah, then the government is considered to be a hypothetical partial owner in each of those things until you pay up your tax debt. That's what it sounds like. Anyways, it's all pretty hypothetical, because I think today most governments collect money instead of items. Am I wrong? At least in the current system. Maybe we're going to go back to a. Anyways, okay. Taner Rabbanan. Back to chametz. Goy shenichnas lechatzer shel Yisrael, a Gentile, meanders into a Jewish space, a Jewish-owned property. And he's holding dough. So now what happened is, and this is a question that a few of us asked, or a variation of a question a few of us asked. It's Pesach, and there's a guy in your property holding dough. In your front yard, in your house. Ein zakek levar, there's no responsibility to obliterate the chametz. And as Rabbi Steinsaltz says, by evicting the guy from your property. If kido etzloi, but if the Gentile says, hey, hold on to my dough, catch, and you catch it, or if he says, hey, if you don't mind, I'm putting it in your refrigerator, I'm going to come get it after my vacation. Zakok levar, now it's your problem. Now you need to get rid of it. Rashi, no. So step one, the guy is holding it. It's his item. It's his problem. No obligation. He gives it to you, and you're now going to be responsible for it. Then you have to get rid of it. Yichid loy bias. But if the Jew did not accept it, did not take responsibility, he just gave the guy, the Gentile, a space and says, hey, you can have this room. Keep it there. Ein zakuk levayer. You do not need to get rid of it. Shenemar lo yimatze. Because the verse says, lo yimatze, it should not be found. Let's read Rashi, and then we'll see the Gemara's questions. Ein zakuk levayer. You don't need to get rid of it. You know why? Lo his kikuhu lohoitzi esanachri min habayis. Aval ataroyesh. It looks like the Rashi's here a little scrambled, maybe. Hang on. Yeah, the Rashi's here for some reason look like they're scrambled. Anyways, okay. So that's the statement. 3 scenarios. He walks in and it's in his possession. No responsibility to get rid of it. He gives it to you and says, hey, hold on to this. Watch it for me. It's your problem. If the Jew says, here, you can have this locker. It's yours. Store whatever you want in there. So the Brisa says you don't need to get rid of it.
Rabbi, could you scroll Steinsaltz a little bit more? How he finishes? Thank you.
What does it mean? Shenemar lo yimatzeh. The chametz should not be found in your possession, but here you've given the Gentile space that's like his own, and so therefore you're not responsible. The Gemara is not going to just accept that lying down. Gemara says, "My Kamar, help me out." As Rashi says, "Hey chiyolef lo yimatzeh." The Brisa says, "You know how I know that if you gave him a place to keep his chametz, it's no problem. Lo yimatzeh, it shouldn't be found to you." Could you explain that line of reasoning? Asks the Gemara. Amar Papa says, "Yeah." Arei shakai. You got to go back. And this comment is actually referencing the first half of the mission. Hachi kamar. If kido etzlai, if you place the chametz in your possession and you're watching it, zakuk l'var, you need to get rid of it. Shenemar lo yimatzeh, because it says lo yimatzeh, it shouldn't be found to you. Rashi. So look back at this text. 1. Halacha 2. If kido etzlai, you got to get rid of it. And then he says Shenemar. So we always assume the Shenemar is a reference to scenario 3. Rav Papa explains, no, actually, this verse is only explaining scenario 1. Rav Ashi disagrees and says no. In truth, there is a connection between the verse Lo Yimatzeh and the third scenario where if you gave him a place to keep his stuff, you don't need to get rid of it. Let's see how Rav Ashi explains this Gemara. Hachi kamar. Yichad lo bayis, if you gave him a space that's his, Ein zakuk levar, you don't need to get rid of it. Shenemar lo yimatzeh bivatechem. Chametz shouldn't be in your home. V'hal avdi dehu, but the area that you give the Gentile to become his is no longer your bayis. The guy ki kamayel lebeso then afshe kamayel. When the Gentile goes into the room that you've allowed him to keep and use as his own, he's going into his own space. Rashi. Lo yimatzeh mashma hamatzeh biyadcha lechol chapatzecha. Matzah found means available, accessible to you. But when you give the Gentile a place to hang out, it's no longer your place for the duration of this allowance, for the duration of giving him a place to hang out, a space to go. It's not your place, it's his place. And therefore, Lo Yimatzeh teaches us Yichid L'Bayis is Taipram. The Gemara says, let's think this through. You cannot just make a comment. You have to really defend it to the end, take it to its logical conclusion. Lememra, the Schiros, Tanya. Are we saying that when you rent a space, you are really kone, you've really acquired that space? By allowing him to have his chametz there as he become a real full-fledged tenant? Again, the guy walks in with your chametz. You go, oh, what'd I do? You remember? Oh, I'm sorry. You remember that. I'm sorry, you see the chametz, you don't want it to be your problem. Oh, no, I have a room for you. Go put it in that room, it's yours. Does that really mean that he was konet? Even in regions, because here's the interesting thing. In general, and this may sound controversial, but there were halachis to restrict renting property or selling property to Gentiles in the land of Israel. Israel is the Jewish country for the Jewish people, and so you don't want to give away that land to Gentiles. Lahavdil, the Arabs have a similar principle in Israel, and it's a Teret Kohanim, right? Works very hard to buy back land. It was originally ours, and the people who usually sell property at exorbitant prices, part of the process is they have to be given an exit strategy. There's actually family here who's close, involved in a Teret Kohanim, and they once housed a Palestinian family that sold, and they were threatened, and they had them here in Florida for a little while, taking care of them. Anyways, maybe off on a tangent. Anyways, and even in areas where you're allowed to give them property, you're not allowed to give them places to live, residence, because they'll bring avodah zara into the property. But if you believe that when you rent something, it becomes theirs, why would you care if a Gentile is bringing avodah zara into his own home? Rashi, some of us learned that. You should not rent homes to Gentiles in Israel. You're allowed to rent. And the reason why you don't want them to have homes is because they're going to bring in avodah zara. Gemara says, no, there's a difference. Shani hachar. With chametz, it's different. Usually, you're right. Schiros, being a tenant, does not give you full possession, ownership of the property during the term of your stay. Chametz is unique. Sometimes to be machmir, sometimes to be mekil. And here we're going to use the principles of chametz to be mekil. Shani hachar. The Torah uses the word lo yimatzeh, shouldn't be found and accessible to. If something is accessible to you, you shouldn't have it. Here, you've given the Gentile the room, you gave him the key, you let him lock it, you let him do whatever he wants. It's not matzoi. It's not fully the Gentiles, but for the purposes of Pesach, it's not matzoi. That area, that corner, that space is in the Gentiles' possession. All right, so interesting. So I just to highlight what happened over here. Generally speaking, the Gemara is inclined to be very machmir when it comes to matters of Pesach, right? More restrictive than usual. But there are occasions where the careful reading of the psukim actually create opportunities for leniency. And one of those instances is here. Yichad lebayis, you give the Gentile a designated space to hang out. Even though he hasn't taken full-fledged possession, it's enough for the purposes of Pesach because of a careful reading of the word lo yimatzeh. It shouldn't be found to you, and indeed, in this case, that is what is going on. I don't know this work, and I'm not sure if it's. I don't know who wrote this, and I don't know if he's Orthodox, Reform, or Conservative. So I probably shouldn't even read it, but he asks an interesting question and quotes our Gemara. Suffice it to say, he asks, can you be in a house that has chametz belong to a Gentile? And he quotes our Gemara and says that if you have a roommate, but the roommate is totally in charge of their own room, so then it's their problem. So the question is, if in halacha lemaisa, and I don't think so, if you have a Gentile roommate, well, let's see. Let's look at the Shulchan Aruch. No. Oh, I was in the wrong place. Hold on. Hold on. All right, let's learn a little more Gemara and then we'll revisit this. Because the next two halachas are also very relevant here. And then we'll try to revisit either today or tomorrow. Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav. If it's Yantif, Mark quoted this Gemara to us. You find chametz in your house, it's Yantif. Cover it with a dish, cover it with a vessel. The haloi chazil tatuli, it's muksa. Va'afuki to take it out. Umiu b'vayira lo yavar. The batlei b'libei. He nullified it in his heart. And he asked him, okay, so you have to nullify. But we're afraid you might forget. Because you're used to eating wafers. You know, in Israel, those individual wrapped wafers, what do they call them? Vafalim? Chocolate coated, very delicious. So you find it on Pesach, on Yontif. So you were mevatel it, you nullified it, says Rashi. So it's not actually like your own chametz, but people's memories are short, and we're used to eating. Ask my kids if they'll find a wafel on the floor, they'll eat it. So by putting a kli on top of it, you'll know that it's chametz, and you have to get rid of it. Amar Rava imshel hakdash. Hold on 1 second. Amar Rava imshel hakdash. If it belongs to the Beis Hamikdash, einay tzarich, you don't even need to put a kli over it. Why? My time on mibdal b'dil minei. We are super conscious of being of not touching hektish. One more line. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Marav. If there a Gentile has chametz in your home, and you weren't mekabel achrayis, says Rashi, the mutul ashrei, so you don't have to get rid of it. Still, you should build a little barrier. But if it belongs to the Beis Hamikdash and it's my time mivdal. So if a Gentile leaves chametz in your home, says Rav, build a little barricade, build a little thing around it. Rashi, not obviously ba'arba asr before Pesach. Mishum heker to make sure that you don't end up eating it. Just to put a kli over it is not enough. Because maybe you're going to need it. So for one day, you can put a kli on top of it. But for a long time, you should build mechitzas. We're still building out the profile of what do you do if a Gentile has chametz. Eli?
Question. Give me 1 second. Something else. So the question I want to ask is, what happens now that if you open up milk the day of Pesach? Why do we say it's okay to keep for Pesach and it's not kosher for Pesach? Why should that be confused. Case?
Hold on, you're coming. Slow down. You're bringing a lot of premises here.
What am I doing wrong?
Ask the question, but don't assume that we know what you're talking about.
So if you open up milk before Pesach,
okay,
it's kosher for Pesach, correct? Right?
Is it okay? No. So you're saying you're
asking. Why should we say that it's okay to have it? Maybe the guy was holding chametz in his hand a minute before that, and you opened it and you don't know. Why should we just not be straight in saying it's not kosher?
I'm not sure where the question is coming from. I will just say this: if your kid has a minhag to put Cheerios into the bottle of milk, you should definitely spill it out right away before Pesach. Yeah. You should be mevayer. No, I'm trying.
I can't hear him. What is he saying?
I don't really understand the premise of your question. Is it kosher for Pesach milk? So then why should it be a problem? If you suspect that chametz went in it, then it should be a problem. Is it not kosher for Pesach?
You're not suspecting that it's not kosher for Pesach.